a fish feeding gathering at a California lake in July 2026. This is Mason Field Notes number 21, series 21. In July 2026, there was a dramatic increase in the number of feeding egrets, herons, cormorants, and terns at Mason Lake. This video provides photographic documentation of their predation on juvenile green sunfish. The event took place at William R. Mason Regional Park in Irvine, Orange County, California. Although the peak fish-eating bird populations were on July 22nd and 23rd, 2026, I'll also include observations from July 21st, 24th, and 27th. Here's a map you can download from the internet showing the main features of Mason Park, including the 9-acre lake. The action mainly occurred in the western part of the lake. The most prominent species were the first two, snowy egrets and great egrets. However, it appeared there was an increase in double-crested cormorants, black skimmers, and certainly Caspian terns. Black-crowned night herons also appeared to increase in numbers. And then they joined the neotropic cormorants, a single yellow-crowned night heron, Forster's terns, American white pelicans, pied-billed grebes, and white-faced ibis. I miss for the list of predators green herons that sometimes are seen at the park. And the prey are juvenile green sunfish. I'm showing you a link to my YouTube video on the sunfish, so if you want more information, you can find it there. This YouTube video concerned Mason's spring spawning of green sunfish. The adult fish are a good food source for green herons, one shown here, and pied-billed grebes and their hatchlings at the lake, as well as other predators. So this is the title slide for that video, which was number 18 in the series. And here is a double-crested cormorant in May of 2026 capturing a sunfish at Mason Lake. And this is from a frame in a video of a young black-crowned night heron with a fish at Mason Lake as well. This was July 4th. Blow that up. And a frame from a video I took at Mason Lake on July 16th showing an adult pied-billed grebe with a very large sunfish and a begging hatchling next to him. I doubt the youngster could swallow this food, and eventually the adult did swallow the fish. Look how big the sunfish is. Some people don't think there are fish at Mason Lake. Mason Lake is not stocked with fish. Fishing hasn't been permitted at the lake for about a decade. The current juvenile green sunfish population is a result of the spring/early summer 2026 spawning season at Mason Lake. So certainly what I've shown in this video should convince some people who think that Mason Lake, aside from mosquito fish, has no fish. That view needs, obviously, correction. So let's go to the morning of July 21st, 2026, the day before the main start of the influx of fish-eating bird species. This partial list I'm going to show you is from a submitted eBird checklist from Mason Regional Park starting at 7 a.m. on that day by Rhonda Howard, with some of my observations in parentheses that morning. I've divided the list into the species showing a large increase in numbers, and then the next slide will be those with smaller or stable populations. So you can see a snowy egret, there were two, There were no great egrets seen on July 21st by Rhonda or myself. Black skimmers 5, Caspian terns 5. So Caspian terns were starting to come into foraging on Mason Lake. In addition to that, on July 21st, Rhonda had 1 yellow-crowned night heron, 2 Forster's terns. There are always a lot of pied-billed grebes building up toward the winter population, 5 white-faced ibis. She did not find the neotropic cormorant, and I was lucky enough to see 3 that day. So here is a view. The lake has been visited by Forster's terns the previous week or so, but this morning, on the 21st, there were mainly Caspian terns hunting in the lake. You can see the rocks around the bridge. In the background, you'll see rocks a little bit more later. Here's another Caspian tern on the 21st. I will blow this up with a fish in its bill. The morning of July 22nd, 2026, this is where it gets interesting. Here's a short video taken about 7:28 in the morning of the tern activity, mostly Caspians at Mason Lake. Note the 2 pelicans at the end of the video. This was pretty much the early part of white pelicans coming to Mason Lake, still early in July. You can see Caspian terns actually kind of skim the water to get their prey. Interesting behavior. And then in this picture, you can see the 2 pelicans, and there are a bunch of cormorants behind them. Here I'm showing you rocks by shelter number 2 on the west part of the lake. Can you see the black-crowned night heron sticking its head out behind the great egret? Remember, there were no great egrets the day before. Also, there's a basking group of double-crested cormorants, and there's also a snowy egret in the picture. Here are 2 hunting neotropic cormorants, one with a fish in its fish tail jutting out of its bill, with a companion snowy egret trying to follow them along the lake edge. And let me blow that up. You can see the one behind it's in the process of eating a small fish. And a frame from a video from the 22nd at 12:50 p.m. with a flock of double-crested cormorants with their typical, at least at Mason, group foraging. I looked up, and I'll show you this. I looked up what a flock of cormorants are called, and it's a gulp, a flight, or a squadron. I like the squadron, given how many could hunt together. A fitting name. Cormorants can swallow their prey underwater, so there may be a lot more fish that were captured, but I don't show them here. And then here on the 22nd, our group of egrets. Remember, no great egrets was seen the day before, and only 2 snowy egrets were seen. And I found out that a group of egrets is called a congregation. Thought that was cute. This is a mixture of great and snowy egrets. So this is my eBird report. It wasn't complete, but it was emphasizing certain species for the 23rd for specific species. So there were 34 snow egrets instead of 2 the previous day. There are now 4 great egrets. The double-crested cormorants jumped. There are always high numbers at Mason Park. I didn't count black skimmers. Caspian terns doubled in population, and black-crowned night herons became much more prevalent along the rocks. In addition to that, this again is from the 22nd. The doesn't look like there are any complete increases here. American white pelicans were not seen the previous day. But just to illustrate that there are a lot of fish-eating predators, fish-eating birds that are at Mason Park. So let's look at the morning of July 23rd. This is the second day of this gathering. Now there are 26 snowy egrets and 12 great egrets. 12. Wow. There were many black skimmers on the lake. Didn't count them. And you look beyond that and you'll see all the egrets around the rocks hunting for their prey. Here's a picture that's really very interesting. It's not often you can get 4 species of egrets and night herons in the same photograph. And this accomplishes that. So let's see what's here. Aha, there's a yellow-crowned night heron. Here's a black-crowned night heron, an adult. Here is, actually there are 2 great egrets there. And there's a snowy egret. In addition to that, there's a black skimmer in this slide, if you can find it, and what looks like on the upper right, a neotropic cormorant. Neotropic cormorants are found at Mason Lake. And then here, this is a view from probably the bridge of the rocks and lake edge west of the bridge. The picture shows, well, you can see lots of great egrets, lots of snowy egrets. Very impressive, very impressive. The water birds at the top are probably all pied-billed grebes in the water, along with some mallard ducks here on land. So let's actually see them catching fish on July 23rd, 2026. And I concentrated on what the great egrets were catching. Took a lot of pictures. So I'm going to show you a short video. The egrets were on the northeast curve of the West Lake, probably about 25 to 30 feet from me. The one in the front, let's see if he'll grab something. Grab something. Ah, swallowed it. But I have better views. There's another one. Up. You can see the fish. Small. It's not one of these large sunfish. That's from the lake. So I'm going to show you a close-up of the fish prey. I sent these photos to Dr. Todd Claudy of the LA County Natural History Museum for his identification. I want to thank him. And these are juvenile green sunfish. I'm going to show you a regular picture. These are not from the video. They're from photographs. And then a close-up of it. I took a lot of pictures to get a few that were reasonable. They did this sort of motion to position the fish to swallow it. See a close-up of that. Another view as well. And finally, last of the series that I want to show you. And they were doing pretty well, the great egrets, and I assume that the snowies were as well. The next morning, I thought, well, gee, the gathering was still happening, because I was able to. I can look at the lake from outside the park actually, and took this video at 6 a.m. in the morning. At that time, the park's fountain is not on. That would be on the top. That's the west part of the lake. There still was a lot of bird activity at this time, with black skimmers, egrets, and other terns. And what we're looking at is the east arm of the lake here. So let me play this for you. You can see the egrets around the edge of this east part of the lake. There comes a black skimmer in the front. Lots and lots of tern activity. Very impressive. Here's a look under the bridge at 7:02 a.m. There's an immature, actually, black-crowned night heron on the left side. And then a view from the bridge of the rocks of the southwest. Not as many birds as the previous day. You can see there's a skimmer there. But by 7:30 a.m. on the 24th, all of the great egrets had left the park, and most of the snow egrets had also left. I didn't see any of the egrets capture prey during that time. I received a report later that 43 cormorants basked along the shore of Mason Lake in the early afternoon of July 24th. So there may have been an increase as well with the cormorants during this feeding episode. And then the morning of July 27th, 2026. I'm including this as there were many egrets, 11 snowy and 8 great, at the lake until about 8:30 a.m. I did not observe any of the great egrets capturing prey along the lake edge. Human traffic in this park may have something to do with their early departure. I should at least include a photo from the 27th. There was a Forster's tern in non-breeding plumage, even though we're looking in July 27th. So let's do a little bit on the causes, possibly, of this feeding assemblage. First, some green sunfish facts. Spawning takes place from May, perhaps to as late as August in California. So while this feeding is going on, they may also be spawning in the lake. Sunfish are tolerant of high turbidity, characteristic of Mason Lakes, low dissolved oxygen. It's a very shallow lake with a lot of organic material in the bottom, and high temperatures. Sunfish spawning events are synchronous in colonies, occurring at intervals of 8 to 9 days over the spawning season. Males may nest 5 or more times in succession during this period, but these fish predators I showed you are not feeding on these recurrent males and females that are breeding every 8 to 9 days. They're feeding on the juveniles. Female sunfish can produce 2,000 to 10,000 eggs per spawn, so they can increase their population dramatically. They are invasive species, and probably the main species of fish at Mason Lake, aside from or even counting the mosquito fish that are there. And then this is from a master's thesis. I'm throwing this as a possibility here, that according to Richard Reiberich, both control and experimental green sunfish indicated stress. He put them under stress when subject to reduced oxygen levels by rising to the surface, tilting their bodies at an angle to position their mouths at the water surface and gulping. What about the juveniles? Could changing oxygen levels in the water correlate for the July observations, that they're closer to the surface, they're more susceptible to predation? And so some speculation and some comments. This is not like grunion, where adult fish exposed to predators like night herons, they suddenly appear when there are these grunion runs, appear as a group on shore, key to environmental factors. The Mason juvenile sunfish don't suddenly inhabit the lake. They then suddenly, appear. So it seems that for unknown reasons, the juvenile sunfish perhaps became more accessible to aerial and lakeshore fish-feeding predators on those days in July 2026. Or perhaps this coincided with the normal dispersal of post-nesting egrets and herons, and with food-searching tern parents in our area. I think the thing to do would be to record the age numbers of each of these groups. Or perhaps the large and growing population of juvenile green sunfish made successful fishing for them energetically worthwhile. Could changing lake water temperatures and dissolved oxygen concentrations impact sunfish juvenile behavior and distributions? What would we expect next year in July of 2027? Could the presence of Caspian terns, high flyers when they come over the lake and don't feed here, with loud call notes, tip off other fish-eating birds in a large area around Mason Lake about this food supply? The San Joaquin Wildlife Sanctuary is nearby, about 3,000 plus feet away, and so is Upper Newport Bay, which is about 2 miles away. So my future plans are that I plan to use a dissolved oxygen meter, which also shows water temperature, and I will try to regularly keep track of those environmental factors at Mason Lake sites where the great egrets were concentrated in the study next year. I plan to do that in July. I'll hopefully be prepared next July if there is a similar assemblage, and may have better answers about what parameters correlate with the event. And I should mention that last year in 2025 on July 11th, there was an increase in Caspian terns that I noted. I did not notice an increase in the white egrets, the greats and snowies. So let me tell you a little bit about the photography. All of my photos and videos were taken either using a Nikon P950 or P1000 super zoom camera. The subjects were neither disturbed, and tried to be as unobtrusive as possible, nor artificially attracted. The pictures were captured without a tripod. They were handheld. I have only made minor edits, including cropping, trimming, and adjustments to contrast and brightness. I never use AI for editing any of my pictures. And acknowledgments. I want to thank Dr. Todd Claudy, Ann Seibert, Calvin Boyer, and an anonymous Orange County Birding Group member for the helpful input during this study. So this has been another of my JDW talks. I have YouTube talks on genealogy topics, census, Ellis Island, immigration, naturalization. I'm well known for that. However, my true love and my early love is natural history topics, virtual birding trips, birding optics, California birds, and since February of 2025, I'm a resident of Irvine, and since June of 2025, I live very close to Mason Park and generate these Mason Park nature notes. I also have some YouTube videos on novelty zithers, biology songs, etc. So I hope you enjoyed that, and if you go out to Mason Park, you might get lucky in July and come across one of these feeding assemblages. Bye-bye.